James had never imagined that his first mission as a human envoy would bring him face to face with an alien queen. Not just any queen, but Queen Xylar, the ruler of a galaxy-spanning empire feared by millions. He had been briefed on her power, her ruthlessness, and her reputation for crushing anyone who dared oppose her. And yet, as he stepped into the throne room, he noticed something entirely unexpected. She looked uneasy. The throne room was enormous, filled with lights that shimmered and changed color with a soft hum. Strange floating structures twisted above the polished floor, reflecting the lights in dazzling patterns. At the center, seated on a massive throne carved from some glowing black stone, was Xylar. Her skin glimmered faintly, her wings stretched elegantly behind her, and her eyes burned with an intensity that made James instinctively straighten his back. She was terrifying and beautiful. But beneath the fearsome exterior, James saw something he hadn't expected: insecurity. The queen fidgeted with a strange, ornate necklace that seemed to reflect her face in warped, shifting ways. Her shoulders slumped slightly, and her usually sharp eyes darted nervously around the room. James cleared his throat and stepped closer, his diplomatic training kicking in. "Your Majesty," he began, keeping his voice calm, "I am honored to meet you." Xylar's head turned slowly, and for the first time, she looked at him not with command or threat, but with hesitation. Do I look terrible?" she asked in a quiet, almost vulnerable voice. James blinked. His mind froze for a moment. Did he hear correctly? The galaxy's most feared ruler, worried about her looks? He had to swallow a laugh. I'm sorry, Your Majesty. Did you say you think you look terrible?" "Yes," she whispered, her eyes clouded with doubt. "I have spent centuries ensuring that my presence commands fear, respect, and obedience. Yet now, when I look at myself, I feel flawed. My wings, my skin, my face. Am I ugly?" James hesitated, carefully weighing his words. He had been trained to negotiate, to speak with precision, to flatter without lying. But this was different. This was raw, human emotion coming from someone who could annihilate him with a thought. Yet looking at her, he felt a surge of empathy. "Your Majesty," he said gently, "I don't think you're ugly. In fact, you're kind of amazing." Xylar's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Amazing? You would not say that if you truly saw me." James shook his head, forcing a small smile. "No, I mean it. I've seen many powerful leaders, but I've never met anyone like you. Your wings, they shine like starlight. Your eyes, they're unlike anything I've ever seen. And your presence? It's incredible." For a moment, silence filled the room. Xylar seemed to study him carefully, as if weighing whether to trust him. "You flatter me, human?" James shook his head, a soft laugh escaping his lips. "Not at all. I just speak the truth. Honestly, your so-called flaws, they make you real. And in a strange way, they make you even more remarkable. You don't need perfection to be amazing." The queen looked away, her gaze falling to the glowing floor. For a moment, James saw her not as a terrifying queen, not as a symbol of power, but as someone fragile, someone human in her own way. She had fought wars, led armies, and conquered planets, yet she feared what she saw in the mirror more than any enemy. James stepped a little closer, his voice soft but firm. "You don't have to face it alone, Your Majesty. Not with me around. No one has to see you as less than extraordinary unless you let them." Xylar's eyes flickered, a mixture of surprise and confusion crossing her features. For the first time, the alien queen seemed vulnerable, and James felt a strange warmth in his chest, a connection across worlds, a silent understanding between two very different beings. And in that moment, the most feared queen in the galaxy was just a being who wondered if she was enough. James could feel the tension in the room, but it wasn't the kind that came from a threat. It was quiet, fragile, almost like holding a fragile crystal that could shatter with one wrong move. Queen Xylar stood tall as always, but her posture had lost some of its usual rigidity. Her hands, which normally rested with absolute command, now fidgeted with the strange necklace around her neck. James noticed the slight tremor in her fingers and felt a pang of compassion. "Your Majesty," he said gently, keeping his voice calm, "you do not need to worry about your appearance. I mean it." Xylar tilted her head slightly, studying him with suspicion. "You would not lie to me? You would speak honestly?" James met her gaze steadily. "I am not here to flatter. I am here to speak truth, human to queen." And the truth is, you are remarkable. You don't need to be perfect. The things you see as flaws are what make you unique. Her wings twitched nervously behind her. Unique? She repeated, her voice soft, almost unsure. I have commanded empires, destroyed enemies, led my people through centuries of war. Yet now, I worry about what I see in the mirror. Am I insignificant? James took a small step forward. No one is insignificant, and worrying about your own appearance does not make you weak. It makes you human. Even if you are alien, even if you rule an entire galaxy, feeling doubt is natural. Zyler's eyes narrowed, a faint flicker of disbelief in them. Human, natural? You? Do not fear me? James smiled, shaking his head. I would be foolish to underestimate you, but fear and respect are not the same as judgment. I don't judge you, Your Majesty. I see someone extraordinary, someone who is brave enough to face everyone else in the galaxy, yet still questions herself. For a long moment, the Queen was silent. Then she spoke softly, almost to herself. I have never let anyone see this side of me. Not my generals, not my advisors, never anyone. And now, you see it. You are human, and yet you dare to look at me as I truly am. James felt a warm sense of connection. He had always believed that humans had a kind of courage that went beyond strength or skill. They could face the impossible, not by being perfect, but by being willing to show themselves, to laugh, to hope, and to care. Your Majesty, he said gently, sometimes the bravest thing a being can do is admit their fears. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you remarkable. Zyler looked away, her gaze settling on the glowing floor beneath her throne. Remarkable? Do you truly mean that? Yes, James said, his voice firm. Even in your uncertainty, even in your doubt. You are extraordinary, and that is not something you need to hide. A faint, almost imperceptible smile began to form on her lips. James noticed how her posture softened, how the tension in her shoulders eased slightly. The air in the throne room felt lighter, as if the very walls had absorbed some of the Queen's fear and released it. You do not mock me, Zyler asked quietly, almost afraid of the answer. James chuckled softly. No, Your Majesty. I am human. We laugh, yes, sometimes at ourselves, sometimes at the strange things we see, but it is never to harm. Laughter is honesty, and right now I am laughing with you, not at you. Because even the greatest queen can have fears, and even the strongest can feel uncertain. That is not weakness. That is life. For the first time, James saw something in the Queen's eyes that no one else had ever seen. It was vulnerability, yes, but also a spark of curiosity, a flicker of something almost like hope. She studied him, and he met her gaze without hesitation. In that silent moment, a bridge formed between two very different beings, human and alien, envoy and queen, doubt and courage. And in that bridge, James realized something profound. Sometimes, even the most powerful in the universe need a simple human perspective to remind them of their worth. For the first time in centuries, Queen Zylar felt exposed, not in front of her generals or her subjects, but in front of a human, fragile, small, yet unafraid to speak truth to her. She had led fleets that could destroy planets, yet here she was, feeling vulnerable under the gaze of someone who had no power in her empire. I do not understand, she admitted softly, her voice trembling. I have conquered worlds, commanded millions, made enemies kneel before me, yet I fear my own reflection more than any of them. James listened quietly, his expression calm. He had learned early on that rushing in to comfort someone often broke more than it healed. So he stayed silent, giving the Queen the space to speak. Zyler's wings trembled slightly as she walked toward the edge of the throne platform, her glowing feathers brushing the air. Every day I must appear perfect. Every battle, every council, every public appearance, I must be flawless. But when I am alone, when I look at myself, I see cracks, imperfections, and I feel weak. James took a careful step forward. You are not weak. You are human in your own way. Even the strongest of us feel fear, doubt, and insecurity. What makes you strong is not that you never feel these things, it's that you continue anyway. Zylar stopped and turned to face him, her eyes wide and searching. Continue. Despite fear? She asked. Is that what makes humans special? James smiled softly. It's part of it. Humans are small and fragile compared to most creatures in the galaxy. But we keep going. We laugh, we cry, we fall, and we get up again. Courage is not about being fearless, it's about facing fear and acting anyway. The Queen's hands fell to her sides. She let the necklace slip from her fingers and watched it swing gently, the light catching on the metal in odd patterns. I thought power would protect me from everything. From fear, from doubt, from myself. Yet here I am terrified of a reflection. James stepped closer, his voice soft but steady. You don't need it to fear it alone. You don't need to hide your doubts. Even a queen, alien or not, can accept that she is not perfect. That is the first step to real strength. Zylar's gaze dropped to the floor. For a moment, silence filled the room, heavier than any battle she had ever faced. She had spent centuries building an empire, controlling her image and crushing enemies without hesitation. But never had she faced the simple honesty of another being telling her that her worth was not tied to perfection. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. No one has ever spoken to me like this. Not my generals, not my advisors, not even my own kin. Never anyone, James nodded, because most people only see the queen, the symbol of power. They do not see the being beneath. I see you, Zylar, not as a queen, not as a ruler, but as someone who can feel, who can doubt, who can fear, and still be incredible. For the first time, a faint smile tugged at the corners of her lips. It was small, hesitant, yet genuine. Her wings fluttered softly, the light catching on them like liquid silver. Incredible. I never thought anyone could see me that way. James shook his head. I don't need to think, I see it. And it doesn't make you weak, it makes you real. And sometimes being real is the bravest thing anyone can be. Zylar took a slow, deep breath. She looked at him, eyes shining with a mixture of disbelief and wonder. Human, you make the impossible seem simple. To face yourself, to accept this fear, is more difficult than any battle I have fought. James smiled gently. The hardest battles are always the ones inside us. And you are winning, Zylar, even if you don't realize it yet. And for the first time in her long life, the alien queen allowed herself to imagine a future where she could be powerful and vulnerable, where fear did not control her, and where she did not have to face her doubts alone. The idea felt strange, almost foreign, but also liberating, because in the presence of a simple human truth, a legendary queen was beginning to see herself as more than her power. She was beginning to see herself as worthy. For the first time since James had arrived, the throne room felt lighter. The tension that had weighed on him like a heavy cloak was beginning to ease. Queen Zylar still stood tall, her wings catching the shifting lights above. But there was something different in her posture. Less armor, less threat, more humanity. James could hardly believe what he was witnessing. The galaxy's most feared queen, the one whose name alone could make worlds tremble, was worried about how she looked. She had admitted it. She had voiced the fears that she had hidden for centuries, and now she waited uncertain, almost afraid of his reaction. He couldn't help it. He laughed. It wasn't loud or mocking. It was warm, soft, full of genuine surprise and amusement. I'm sorry, Your Majesty, he said between chuckles. But the idea of the most terrifying being in the galaxy worrying about her reflection, it's hilarious. Zylar froze, eyes wide, and her wings twitched nervously. You laugh. At me? She asked, voice shaking slightly. James shook his head quickly. No, not at you. With you, because it's just so human, isn't it? You've faced armies, destroyed enemies, commanded millions, yet you are afraid of a reflection. It's strangely beautiful. The queen's lips twitched, and for the first time a small, unsure smile formed. Beautiful? She repeated. You find this beautiful? Yes, James said gently, still smiling. Because it shows that even the strongest beings can be vulnerable. And there is courage in that. True courage. Zylar studied him, trying to hide the faint blush on her cheeks. She had spent millennia being feared, respected, worshipped even. And yet here was a human, so small, so ordinary, and yet so fearless in his honesty, making her feel something she had not felt in centuries. Relief. Relief? She whispered. Yes, James said softly. Relief that you don't have to be perfect. That you don't have to hide your fears. That someone can see the real you and not run away. Not only that, someone can see it and even laugh with you. The queen's wings twitched again, this time less nervously and more like a reflex of surprise. She had never been laughed with, only at or perhaps around, but never with. It felt strange, light, liberating. I do not know how to react to this, Zylar admitted, her voice trembling. I have spent centuries ensuring my image is untouchable. And now, I feel oddly exposed. James stepped closer, keeping his tone soft. Exposed is okay. Vulnerable is okay. You are allowed to be more than just a queen, Xylar. You are allowed to be yourself. Even if that self worries, even if that self doubts, even if that self feels imperfect. A flicker of something like joy appeared in her eyes. She looked down at her reflection in the polished floor, then back at James, and for the first time she laughed. Not a cruel or terrifying laugh, but a real one. Warm, melodic, freeing. James laughed with her, the sound filling the throne room, echoing against the alien walls. And in that shared moment, a bridge formed between human and alien, fear and courage, doubt and acceptance. The Queen, the most powerful being in the galaxy, had allowed herself to let go just a little of the weight she had carried for centuries. You are strange, human, Xylar said, still smiling. No one has ever made me feel this. James shook his head, grinning. I'm just human. We're a strange species. We laugh at things that terrify us, we cry at things that move us, and we keep moving forward anyway. And apparently sometimes we can help queens of galaxies do the same. Xylar tilted her head, wings shimmering softly. She had never felt laughter as she did now, not as a weapon, not as a threat, but as freedom. And in that laughter she began to see herself differently. Less perfect, less untouchable, more alive. Because James had shown her something even power could not teach. Sometimes, the bravest thing a being could do was laugh at themselves, and let someone else laugh with them, and in that laughter the alien queen found hope. After that first shared laughter, the throne room felt different. The lights, the floating structures, the polished floors, they all seemed less intimidating. For the first time, Queen Xylar allowed herself to breathe without the weight of centuries pressing down on her, and James noticed it immediately. Your Majesty, he said gently, you don't always have to be perfect. You don't have to be untouchable. You can just be. Xylar's wings twitched softly, a faint glow illuminating the edges. Be it myself? She asked quietly. I have not allowed myself to simply be in centuries. My advisors, my generals, even my closest kin, they expect perfection. Fearless, unbreakable, untouchable, that is all I have ever known. James nodded. I understand, but no one can carry that alone forever. Even the strongest, the most powerful, need someone they can trust, someone they can be honest with, without fear of judgment. For a long moment the Queen was silent. She looked at him, her eyes searching. There was hesitation, but also a spark of something new, curiosity, perhaps even hope. You would not leave me? She asked softly. Even if you saw my imperfections? Even if you saw all that I fear? James shook his head firmly. I'm not going anywhere. I came here as an envoy, yes, but I see you as more than your title or your power. I see you as someone who matters, and someone who deserves to be understood. Xylar's gaze dropped to her hands, the fingers brushing the glowing floor. She had not expected a human to speak this way. She had not expected anyone to see her beyond the crown and the wings, beyond the empire and the fear she commanded. Yet here was James, small, unarmed, and fearless, offering something she had never had. Trust. I have never shared my fears with anyone, she admitted quietly. Not my generals, not my advisors, not even my closest allies. And yet, I feel that I can tell you. James smiled softly. You don't have to share them all at once. Just a little. One step at a time, that's enough. Xylar allowed herself to sit on the edge of her throne, wings folding softly behind her. She spoke of battles that had gone wrong, of moments when she had doubted her own decisions, and of the loneliness that came with being the most powerful being in the galaxy. James listened. He did not interrupt. He did not judge. He simply heard her. And with every word, the Queen seemed less like a godlike figure and more like someone he could truly admire. Not for her power, but for her honesty. For the courage it took to let someone in, you make it seem easier. Xylar said after a long pause, her voice quiet, almost reverent. To face the fear. To admit it. To survive it. Humans are strange beings. You laugh, you cry, you stumble, yet you endure. And yet, you also help others endure. That is remarkable. James shook his head. It's not remarkable. It's just being human. And right now I see that you are more than the queen you've been. You are more than your fears. You are yourself, and that is enough. A soft warmth spread through Xylar's chest. For the first time in centuries, she felt seen. Not as a ruler, not as a symbol, but as a being capable of fear, hope, and even love. And she realized something profound. Vulnerability was not weakness. Sharing it could be a kind of strength no army could teach. She looked at James, her eyes shining. Human, you have changed something inside me. You have reminded me that even a queen can be fragile, and that it does not make her less. Perhaps it even makes her stronger. James smiled. You've always been strong, Xylar, but now you see it for yourself. And in that moment, in the quiet of the throne room, trust formed between two beings from different worlds, a bond that neither power nor fear could break. For the first time, Queen Xylar allowed herself to imagine a future where she was not alone, a future where she could face her fears and still remain magnificent, because sometimes, the greatest power in the universe came not from armies or weapons but from understanding, empathy, and the courage to trust. The following days passed in a strange, unexpected rhythm. James and Queen Xylar spent more time together, not as envoy and ruler, but as two beings slowly discovering a connection neither had anticipated. The throne room, which once felt cold and intimidating, became a place where conversation, laughter, and quiet reflection could exist. They walked through the palace gardens, where glowing plants stretched toward the twin suns, and streams of liquid light trickled in soft currents. Xylar's wings shimmered softly in the sunlight, casting patterns of silver and gold on the floor. She spoke of her favorite places in the empire, of the stars she had seen from high balconies, and even of foods from distant worlds she secretly enjoyed but never admitted to anyone. James listened, asking questions, listening more than he spoke, never rushing her, and with every word Xylar began to see herself differently. The fears that had haunted her, the constant worry about perfection, the pressure to always appear untouchable did not vanish. But with James by her side, they no longer seemed suffocating. You make it seem simple, Xylar admitted one afternoon, sitting beside a stream of softly glowing water. Her wings were relaxed, folding gently behind her. To accept myself, to accept fear, to accept that I can be imperfect, James smiled. It isn't simple. Humans aren't perfect either, but we keep trying. We stumble, we fall, we laugh, and sometimes we cry. And when someone shows us patience, someone shows us kindness, we start to believe we are enough. Xylar looked at him, her eyes softening. And you show me kindness, even when I feel small, even when I doubt, even when I frighten you. You could never frighten me, James said quietly. Not really, because I see you. Not the queen, not the legend, not the wings or the crown. I see you. For the first time, Xylar allowed herself to feel completely seen. She remembered centuries of fear, of people bending before her power, and she realized none of them had ever looked at her like James did. Not with judgment, not with awe, not with hesitation. He saw her and he accepted her. And acceptance felt like a kind of freedom she had never known. Human, she whispered almost shyly, you have done something no one else has. You have reminded me that even a queen, an alien queen, can be human, and that is powerful. James shook his head softly. You've always been powerful, Xylar, but now you see it yourself. That is what matters. Not armies, not fear, not conquest, just knowing who you are and being willing to be yourself. Xylar let out a soft laugh, the kind that warmed the air like sunlight. I never thought I could laugh like this. Not without armor, not without masks, not with anyone who might see weakness. You don't need armor around me, James said. I've seen the real you. And I like it, more than I can explain. The Queen's eyes glimmered. Perhaps the galaxy is not as lonely as I thought, perhaps. There are beings who can see strength in vulnerability, who can see courage in fear, who can care. James smiled. There are. And sometimes the smallest gestures, laughter, honesty, trust, are more powerful than fleets or weapons. More powerful than fear. Xylar nodded slowly, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the suns overhead. The walls of the palace, the shining floors, the grandeur of her empire, all of it faded into the background. What mattered now was this: connection, trust, understanding, and a human who dared to show her that even the strongest being could be vulnerable, and that vulnerability was not weakness. For the first time, the Queen allowed herself to imagine a life where fear did not dominate, where imperfection could exist, and where someone she trusted could walk beside her. Not as a subject, not as a servant, but as a companion, a friend. A human who dared to see her for who she truly was. And in that imagining, Xylar felt something she had not felt in centuries. Hope. The day came for James to return to Earth. The suns hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across Queen Xylar's palace. The throne room, once cold and imposing, now felt warm and alive. Every glowing panel, every floating structure, seemed to hum with the energy of the bond that had formed between human and queen. Xylar stood at the top of her throne platform, wings folded elegantly, her eyes reflecting the soft light. She had always been powerful, feared, unstoppable, but today she was something more. Vulnerable, yes, but also strong in a way no battle or conquest could ever teach. "James," she began, her voice calm yet tinged with emotion. "You have done something that no one else in centuries has managed. You have reminded me that even a queen, an alien queen, can be human, and that humanity is more powerful than any weapon." James smiled gently. "You've always been powerful, Xylar, you just didn't always see it. And sometimes all it takes is a little perspective from someone who believes in you to realize what you've had all along." Xylar's wings fluttered softly, catching the fading light. "I thought power alone would define me. I thought fear, armies, and legends were what mattered. But you've shown me something different. That courage, kindness, trust, laughter, these things can shape a being more than any empire ever could." James nodded. "Humans are like that. We don't have the strength of entire fleets or planets, but we have something else. We care, we connect, we see each other, and sometimes that is enough to change worlds." The Queen's gaze softened. She had spent centuries isolated at the top of her empire, commanding fear and respect, but never trust. Never friendship. Never the simple, unassuming truth that a being could care without judgment. And now, standing before James, she understood that trust and connection could be more powerful than any weapon in the galaxy. "You have changed me, James," she admitted quietly, her voice almost a whisper. "You've reminded me that even the strongest can feel fear and still endure, that even the most feared can be fragile and still remain magnificent, and for that, I am grateful." James took a step closer, his eyes meeting hers. "You've always been magnificent, Xylar, but now you can see it too. That is the difference. And you don't have to face your fears alone anymore." For a long moment they stood in silence. The air shimmered with a quiet energy, not from lights or technology, but from the bond they had built. Trust, understanding, laughter, and hope. These were forces more powerful than any weapon or army. Forces that could transform even the most isolated, fearsome being into someone capable of acceptance, connection, and love. Finally, Xylar's lips curved into a full, genuine smile. "Perhaps the galaxy is not as lonely as I thought, perhaps. Even a queen can find someone who sees her as she truly is. Someone who laughs with her, not at her. Someone who reminds her that being human, or at least feeling human, is not weakness, but strength." James smiled back. "Exactly. And remember this, Xylar, your fear does not define you. Your power does not define you. You define yourself, through courage, through trust, through laughter, and through the willingness to be seen. That is what makes you extraordinary." The Queen nodded slowly, wings shimmering one last time in the light of the setting suns. She stepped down from her throne platform, closing the space between them. "Thank you, human, for reminding me of something I had forgotten, for showing me that even the strongest can feel, can falter, and can still rise." James inclined his head. "It was my honor, Your Majesty, truly." As he turned toward his ship, ready to return to his own world, he looked back and saw her standing there, not as the untouchable queen, not as a legend of fear, but as someone who had embraced herself, flaws and all. She laughed quietly to herself, the sound light, free, and beautiful, a sound that no throne room, no empire, no galaxy had ever heard before, and in that laughter, James knew the galaxy had witnessed something rare and powerful, a being of legend, learning that courage and humanity, even in the smallest form, could shine brighter than fear, stronger than armies, and more enduring than any empire. Because sometimes, the greatest force in the universe is not strength, not conquest, not fear, it is the courage to be human, and to see humanity in others.